Hey, it's Noir Nerd, and I wanted to talk today about a little project I've started working on, which actually might not take that long to do, and which I think could actually be quite useful for as a tool. So I'm sort of experimenting at the minute with creating a basic. I mean, it's sort of more like a framework or templating system, but you could probably say it's sort of an engine in a sense, but it's more of a framework because it's built around A-frame. And that is a interactive fiction templating system, or maybe more something like I don't know exactly what to call it really, but it's basically going to be a interactive fiction template or framework or what have you for making interactive fictions in VR. Now, this doesn't look like much. This is sort of where it's at, but I'm going to go a bit more in depth into what I've been doing so far, what the general idea is, and all that sort of thing. So this doesn't look like much right now. I get it. Like this is not much. You've got the usual, it's just a blank A-frame scene. You got like a bit of dialogue here, some text, and a box, and this red tube plane actually, which doesn't really do much at the minute. But I'll sort of talk about what I'm doing. Obviously, you can switch to VR mode like usual, which doesn't do much on this desktop PC. But let's just talk about the idea I've got. So, like, if you've been watching the channel, you know I've been working on that space generation thing a bit recently. But I wanted to just sideline into something else, which is the scope is smaller and has like potential, like I said, as a sort of tool. I wanted to get more into the realms of coding tools, basically. Like, I've done this a bit in the past in prototype form, but I want to do it a bit more. Anyway, what is this? So the current idea is called Papyrus 3D. The idea is building an engine for generating 3D interactive fiction games based on JSON input. So based on some JSON that the player, well, the builder, I guess, or the storyteller creates, it then generates automatically an interactive fiction game based purely on JSON. So obviously that's you're talking like a configuration file, which is for game configuration, character JSON, which is getaway characters, and dialogue. This in a way is taking a leaf out of RenP, which is actually which is actually an engine I've used a little bit in the past 6 months. Just I started experimenting with it, and I thought, how could I apply the way you do things in? I mean, it's not JSON in RenP's case, but basically, how could I take that sort of way of doing things and translate it into using A-frame? Because I've been doing a lot of experiments with A-frame recently. I've been working in the WebXR space and that sort of thing, and I wanted to I sort of had the idea of, well, it would be cool if you could do that, but it was in 3D and browser based in the you could also have the potential to add VR support. So that's why I started working on this project, which I'll show you some of the code. I'm going to do a basic code overview of the code so far. Like I said, it's working code, so this is a work in progress. It's certainly not finished. There's still a lot of loose ends to work out, but it is starting to turn into something, right? In terms of releasing it, I'm not exactly sure yet. We'll see. I'm either in two minds whether to release it open source, or probably will release it open source, to be honest, and make a sort of community website for it of some sort. Anyway, other way. What does it actually do? So you have these JSON files here. So you got some basic ones I started setting up now. Let me just put this into presentation mode, maybe. Oh, can I do this? No, I can't. So, but yeah, you have these. So this is examples of a JSON file, for example, with the basic sort of. Obviously, this is working still prototypal, but your story name, your author, you can specify your background color for the UI, which I've just only started really prototyping. You can obviously do the text color, and then obviously this will have a lot more options later on. But the idea essentially is that the person who you download this template as a zip file or something, and then you can edit these JSON files, and you can it then creates a game configuration, and then obviously they've got a load of associated JavaScript, which we'll go into in a minute. You have the actual story itself, which is, I'm going to talk a bit now about the actual thinking that's going behind that, and the characters of JSON. There'll probably be more in the future, but again, this is like prototypal code basically. So for example, let's go into like the basic thinking around this, and it's probably going to change quite a lot. We have, and it's sort of based on Rempe's way of, in Rempe I think you have the script RPY files, which is sort of structured similarly to this. So you'd have like passage, it's an array, and then you've got all the different objects there. So and this would run in a linear order at present. So you've got the character reference, you've got the position of the character, which I'll probably keep in there, though I've not implemented the actual system for that now. So basically you say which character is saying this, so you've got a reference to that, and then also the position of the character, so that you can load the models in and then position them, but then the positions can change. Probably going to add animation later as well. And then you've got the text obviously, and then the idea is, which I mean I've already got the text showing the JSON loading, and then the actual text showing for the first passage. And then you could basically scroll, like in any interactive fiction game, you can scroll through these different objects. So for this one, so this would be passage 1, this would be passage 2, or the index value looks like 0 and 1, but you know what I mean. And then also, some of them not actually got onto yet, but probably the next thing in line is the choices. So obviously in any interactive fiction or choose your own adventure story, you can usually make choices when you have a fork in the road, if you will. So basically essentially it's just a sort of similar to this, and you have the text that's going to appear in the UI, which then gets replaced when it's loaded, and then the link to the passage, which is the next, which is this. I might separate this out actually. It would make more, or I'm not sure. Like I'm still structuring how I'm going to do this, but they like link. They then have a link, so if you clicked on that specific button, yada yada yada. I guess that probably makes sense, but let's have a look. And then I've also got a JSON file for characters, which is basically just character configurations. There's only one character I'm working on in a minute. So you've got a name, an ID, which is a unique ID for the character, and then a reference to the model in the scene. So at the minute I've only got one model I just downloaded, which is actually Naruto from the anime, but that would be, of course, we've ever done that. The actual index itself is, let's just quickly, I'll show that before we jump into the JavaScript, which should probably be the more interesting meaty part, I guess. So it's just an A-frame scene basically, got a camera, look controls, the dialogue here, which will always be there in the main sort of game loop, if you will. Oh, and this just was testing out some, adding models and just basically, so I've got that to hand. I'm just commented out at the minute, but that will be dynamically added in the JavaScript to the scene itself, to the actual DOM. So yeah, and at the minute I'm just sort of perfecting this, working on the actual dialogue UI, which is just defined here, which contains so the actual text is populated. So like if we go back to the scene, appearance, exit presentation mode, if I go back to the actual scene here, this is being populated from JSON. If I go inspect, I'll just have to move this because I'm on the other side. If I go here, and we go, I think it's on the console. Oh no, I've took the, oh no, there we go. So we've got the, you can see that's being loaded. So yeah, this is the JSON that's being loaded into the scene. So if you've got the passage here, it's you've got 0 char Bob. So hello there, I am Bob. that's what's being loaded. Well, that's actually the second passage, but basically that is being dynamically loaded now from the JSON itself. So obviously that's the first step. It's very early days on it, but let's dive into the JavaScript. So this is obviously got A-frame minified version. And let me just go into presentation mode again. This seems like quite an obvious idea of something to do, but I don't think anybody's done it, so I thought I'll have a crack at it. It's not really going to be hugely complicated. There's no procedural generation really like I've been working on recently, which is of course can get very complicated, and I'm already sort of reaching the limits of how to optimize that. It's already getting very bloated, so I thought this would be a much more interesting thing to work on in the meantime. So I've got some global game variables here, config chars. Those are basically literally just references, which can be, they're let variables that can be reassigned for the configuration, the characters, the dialogue, and the textures. So I've just got all that, and then I've also got the reference to the UI elements there with the query selector for A scene. It selects the A scene entity, and then dialogue ID is selected with an ID there just to get the element ID. That'll probably be added to in the future. I obviously need to add choice-based dialogues and all this. And then just a bit of code here that loads the actual data. So I'm using asynchronous loading. And if we go here, it's just, at the minute it's very basic, like it's just the fetch, and I load in the JSON here, and then it just gets assigned to those global variables above. So these are here, and then they just get assigned some actual data, which is the data that's in those JSON files I was showing earlier, and that works. And then after that is populate the scene, which I'll talk about in a minute, and populate dialogue. Populate scene. Sorry, Mr. Semicolon. Populate scene. I'm one of those JavaScript programmers. I mean, that's debatable. That's a big funny thing. Actually, there's a debate about whether they're really that necessary, but I always think it's good. It's a good idea to add semicolons at the end of each line. Anyway, I digress. So we've got populate scene, which I'll talk about in a second, and then populate dialogue, which is where the actual dialogue populating gets done. So it's good to populate scene, for example. So this is not finished function, but I thought I'd just talk about it. So we've got assets which are loaded in here. I say creating an element. Sorry, so it creates an element of type A assets, which is an A-frame specific tag for adding your asset references, basically. And obviously just append it to the scene, which is declared above. And then we've got the old trusty for loop. So I'm still working on this. Actually, it doesn't seem to work for a little minute, but the idea is that we create a new tag of a asset item. And then we set an attribute with an ID. So this is the actual model that loads in has an ID in the JSON. So we get character model, which is the reference to the model in the directory. So the 3D model for Bob in this case, and it's just that's defined in the JSON basically. And then assets, append child asset item, which in theory that doesn't seem to work at the minute for some reason. I need to obviously check it out. It should append this asset item to that. For the amount of characters that there are, it should add those characters. And then this is all about adding the actual models. So this part is all adding the models to the scene with the associated attributes. So for example, and again, this is what I'm working on. So the model references the ID, is given an ID in the DOM, and then create an entity, give it the attributes, the normal ones like name. We've got the model reference above, like this is here, and I'd give it a generic position in a minute, but it'll probably be different later, and then scale it as well. Scaling might be an issue actually, because I'll probably have to scale it according to the actual size of the scene, because of the like in comparison to the model. So for example, when I'm loading in the model that I have at the minute, which is just a test model I downloaded from the internet, it was actually huge in comparison to the scene. So that's something I have to mess around with a bit, and obviously that there's no way without doing some sort of calculation of knowing exactly how small or big relative to everything else that model will have to be, so we'll have to get into that. Yada yada yada. And then I've got create square room. So this is actually working as well, so there's another function here. So I'm using a functional programming approach, so there's a lot of stuff here that I've not got onto yet, but they've got next scene goes through. Okay, so create room. Create square room basically just creates what this is, very basic at the minute, and it needs to be improved. But the idea I think I've got at the minute is also that there will be different templates for creating different types of rooms. So for example, this will probably also have something like textures, texture wall, texture. I'll start it now. I think I might as well. Texture floor, and then you can dynamically. There'll probably be another JSON for the actual rooms too, for each scene, and then you can dynamically add specific textures and a specific floor texture. I could even go further with this, obviously, and make it so that you can add in custom models, so custom background elements with customized positions passed in. But again, at the minute, it's pretty self-explanatory. You have the wall, it's basically a template for creating a square room. Now at the minute it's not actually square, there's only 2 walls in it, but like I said, I'm still just appending, adding attributes. It's all the same as what it was before. I've just basically started creating I'm not finished yet, but it's a room function for, it's just a switch, and then you'd run different types of functions based on the specifications and the configuration for the scene, basically. So for indoor and outdoor, you'd have an outdoor generation scene, which would generate an outdoor scene and an indoor scene. I've not really thought of many more than that, but there will be more, I think. But yeah, obviously I need to get the essential stuff working first. Like the main thing obviously is the passage, being able to move through passages and make choices, of course. What else? So this is where the actual this is nothing really that complicated. Where it may get complicated is it sort of dynamically resizes if I put in a huge wad of text, but the wrapping is not something I've it's not something I've stress tested that much, basically. So we just have, let me just explain this actually, and then I'll probably wrap it up in a bit. So this is our dialogue, which is defined above, if you remember when I was talking before. Then there's the passage, and then the passage ID, which needs to be passed, obviously. So you pass the function this passage ID. At the minute I'm just passing it, I'm not passing it 0, actually I'm passing it 2 or something. And then the text, the text part of it, which loads in the actual text itself on that. So basically that JSON that's being loaded in is an object, and then we get the passage with the specific ID that we want. This is this value here, which is an index value at present. I'm probably going to add in, to make it a bit easier for the player, I'm probably going to make it so that I'll just do an index +1, because obviously in the indexing it will start from 0, but we don't actually want that, because it'll load in an array of the passages and it'll start from 0, but it, for example, the bit with the choices, the link to passage, it'd probably make more intuitive sense to have it so that, where you've got, I don't know, I need to think about that basically, but at the minute you can just do it with indexing, but I will have to probably change that later. I think I've got a character name, which is just the character, which is also loaded in at the start. Attribute with the wrap count, so you could probably even customize that, possibly, but I don't know if I want to open that up, if I can help it. width for the text, yada yada yada. That should actually be different. That's wrong. I just noticed that's a comma. Anyway, that's a mistake on my part. That should be width 3.2, not comma 2. Like I said, very early prototypal code this. And then where they actually get the text populating is value, and then I've just got the character name, which is that there, and that's just for a new paragraph, new line. Basically, that is what it means in JS language. Let's create a new line and new passage. That's how it is now. But I'll just demonstrate quickly that you can if I load it in, like, so before it said something about John Smith. Go off this now, reload the whole thing, it'll load up a different passage. The actual loading, well, that's fairly, yeah, so hello there, I'm Bob. So the actual loading works, and that's not that hard. It's not that tough to do that. But yeah, basically I just wanted to, it's been quite long actually, but I wanted to do a little bit of a brief code overview, talk about this idea, and I think it's a good idea. I think it's got some legs. Like, I've also got some plans to, if I get far enough with this, I want to make it so that you can, basically build the whole thing. So this will come later, but I want it so that you can basically bundle the whole thing up. So that would be quite cool, I think. Obviously, and there's the planned features like component system, custom models, avatars, dialogue system of branching, define 3D scene. Oh, I already talked about that. So yeah, one blue sky thing, which I don't know if I'll ever get around to that, but basically once it's all done and like polished, it'd be quite nice to create an interface for actually just creating the stories. It's a further abstraction, right? But that would be quite, for user friendliness, it'd be quite good, because what I mean, RenP basically does the whole thing with you're editing basically configuration files, so that it's not that unusual in interactive fiction engines to have to do that, but I guess it's more, if I get time to do that one. And exporting, so basically because it's in A-frame anyway, it's going to support web and VR out the box anyway, desktop as well, mobile really too. It should be fine, to be honest, because I mean A-frame basically is handling a lot of that in terms of you could package it up as an APK. One idea I did have, I know certainly that there are ways that you can have configuration and like sort of packages that can bundle up a project as an APK. That would be obviously really cool, because then you could basically just use a template system, write your story, load in your own models, textures, what have you, and then basically just create an app with a command or something from the terminal. But again, I'm nowhere near that level yet. At the minute, the basic, in terms of like the assets and everything, I'm still figuring that out. Like I've downloaded a bunch of texture libraries and I've separated them out, and then I think the idea I'd have would be that basically when you download the whole thing, it will have a bunch of prefabs, if you will, for textures that you can just use, which is just like open source royalty-free textures that are found online. So it's like wood, like different materials basically. And then that again, it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of quickly being able to create scenes, not have to think about doing all this yourself, abstracting all that away, and you basically just give customize the JSON files, which, like I said, it's still in progress, but you'd basically spend, so that you'd have this game folder and you just literally this is another thing that I was working on actually. This is the basic idea that it's not really loaded at the minute of customizing the scene. So you have indoor, and this is where it comes into the whole, having the templates which you can just load up. So room type and door, room textures, and then you specify the room textures you want, room width, like height, depth, blah blah blah. and then it basically just pulls in this JSON, renders everything out, generates and renders everything for you on the fly. And I think that, like, I've been doing a lot of this, I'll just try generally now, like, I've been doing a lot of this generative stuff recently, and I thought, what's like a really good real world application that might actually be useful, people might actually have, you know, people will actually find it useful, and this is the idea that came to mind. And yeah, I think I'll leave the video there. It's already quite long, sorry, 25 minutes. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll be interested in what anybody thinks if this has actual, you know, potential for. Would you use this interactive fiction library if such a thing was available? I think it's. I'm going to actually design it very much with VR in mind. I'm about to add a cursor, gaze cursor, and then most of the actual interactions will be done based on gaze. I'm not going to have it so that much. What was I going to say? Oh, I forgot my. Well, I was. God, I lost my train of thought. I'm not going to make it so that. Oh God, I've really lost it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. That was a bit of a bungled up the last part of the video, sorry. But yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think of the actual code I'm writing so far. What do you think of how I'm approaching this? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's would you use it yourself? Would you experiment with it? That's about all. So yeah, it's been one nerd. Have a good one.